What is going on today, everybody? It's Buddy, and in this video I'm going to show you guys how I took this super neglected, raggedy 23-year-old pickup truck and turned it into thousands of dollars of profit. And if you're new to the channel, my name is Buddy, and I actually flip cars for a living full-time and make videos on the entire process I use while doing it. So if you want to learn how to get potentially profitable vehicles at low prices, how to fix them up, and flip them and make a whole lot of money on the back end, be sure to subscribe now so you don't miss anything. I'm about to go over the entire process I use from buying and selling a car, from how much I knew I should buy it for, how much I knew I could sell it for, how much money I had to put into it, and ultimately how much money I made. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Now, if you see my other car flipping videos, you'll know that I find most of my deals here on Facebook Marketplace. Facebook Marketplace is now the biggest private online for sale group for pretty much everything under the sun, and that definitely includes cars and trucks. But this time I found what seemed to be a killer deal here on OfferUp. OfferUp is just another one of those for sale apps that people can sell all their stuff on, including their cars and trucks. Like I said, Facebook is the biggest, but OfferUp does seem to be the second biggest app next to Facebook for private sales. A lot of old school people, and I'm also finding a lot of younger kids under the age of 21 don't have a Facebook, so many of them just use OfferUp for their for sale apps. Now, one thing good about OfferUp is that there's not much competition with cars and trucks for sale, so the prices tend to actually be a little bit lower on OfferUp. So I was scrolling one night before bed and I saw this new post come across my screen. It was a 1999 GMC Sierra 1500 with 130,000 miles. Their ad price was set at $3,500, which was pretty undervalued considering the prices of used vehicles these days, especially a truck right now. So it definitely piqued my interest. The ad was extremely vague, and all it stated was 5.3 liter, which is the engine size, and it needs work. Now, you can probably assume that needs work means it needs a lot of work, especially considering this low price. It's probably a safe bet that the seller is also not very mechanically inclined, because I find almost every time I buy a vehicle from someone who is mechanically inclined, their listing looks somewhat like this. It has all the stuff that they just did to the car. It also has everything it needs in the description, so I can kind of assume that this guy is probably not very mechanically inclined, and I was really happy to see that this was the 5.3 liter V8 engine and not the V6, because that price difference is pretty big. Now, the pictures didn't help too much either. There was only 2 pictures and they were really grainy. Now, what I could make out is the back sticker saying 4x4, which is a huge plus because that means it's a 4-wheel drive truck, and 4-wheel drive trucks are considerably more expensive than a regular 2-wheel drive truck. I couldn't really tell the condition of the paint or if there was any body damage, considering the picture quality was just awful. The interior picture was also garbage quality, but it definitely was good enough to see that absolute mess of a driver's seat. It literally looked like someone stuffed a grenade inside the seat, pulled the pin, and ran away. It was so shredded you can even see the metal frame of the seat. Honestly, in all the years I bought cars, I've never seen a seat that jacked up looking, but it's definitely repairable. Now, this was the only interior picture on the ad, but using some reasonable judgment here, you can probably assume that the rest of the interior was pretty jacked up. Now, a 5.3 liter V8 4x4 truck will sell fast. It is a very sought after truck, and the engine is big enough to haul things. Everyone loves a 4x4 truck, so I knew this thing would sell in a few days, and I knew if the price and condition was right, this would be a great buy for me. Now, I was pretty curious what this truck's Blue Book value was, so I hopped on kellybluebook.com and entered in all the information about the truck and saw old trucks like this with the 5.3 are booked around $6,500. Now, I also hopped on Facebook Marketplace and did some looking on what a truck like this was listed at, and I saw some people were asking a good bit more than $6,500, but these trucks were also a little bit newer, so I figured the $6,500 mark was pretty accurate given the recent inflation in the used car market. Now, I saw one guy trying to sell his 2004 for $20,000, which was absolutely absurd, but nonetheless, I think $6,500 is a pretty safe bet. So anyways, I was really curious about this truck, so I decided to shoot the seller a message, and if you've watched my videos before, you'll know that I do not like to talk too much numbers over text. The absolute worst thing that you can do is message someone just spitting out a stupid lowball offer without even seeing the truck. So what I did is I shot him a message and I just asked, do you have any wiggle room on the price? He replied with maybe. I'm in Suntree, which is an area about 15 minutes from me, and I wasn't going to sit there and hammer him with a bunch of questions, so we figured out a good time for the both of us to check it out, and I set off to see the truck in person. Now, while we're driving to the seller's house, I want to talk about a few things real quick with you guys. A question I get asked a lot is, how do I know how much I should spend on a vehicle? Now, he has it posted for $3,500 obviously, and reasonably thinking, with this thing fixed up, it'd sell for about $6,500, that's going to leave us with about a $3,000 profit margin just based on those two numbers. I'm obviously going to try and negotiate for a lower price, but let's just go off those numbers real quick for argument's sake. There's a $3,000 profit margin, and yes, that is good, but what if it needs $2,000 worth of work? Then that profit margin goes all the way down to $1,000, and that's also assuming there's no surprises when fixing it, because that's also going to cut into the profit margin. Also, you need to determine how much your time is worth. You don't want to spend 50 hours fixing a car and only come out with $1,000 either. So you need to do a little bit of math ahead of time, know what a good price to pay for the car depending on how much work you think it needs, and come up with a number in your head before you offer it to the seller. Now, a big part of knowing how much work a vehicle is going to need is being able to properly inspect a used vehicle. And lucky for you guys, I made an entire video series on how to inspect a used car before you buy it so you don't get ripped off. Now, even if you don't want to get into car flipping, these videos are going to help you guys out a lot even when you're making your own personal next car purchase. There's a lot of valuable information that's packed into these videos. Be sure to check those out as well. I'll leave a link for those in the description. Now, you'll also need an Obd reader if you want to buy a car with any sort of confidence. I have never gone to buy a car without an Obd reader with me, and for you guys' sake, I'll link 3 Obd readers in the description for you guys, all on Amazon at 3 different price points. And I'm also going to leave this video in the description as well. This video goes over the differences between cheap, mid-grade, and more higher end scan tools so you guys can actually be an educated decision maker when you're making your next purchase on your Obd scanner. So after about 15 minutes of driving, we finally arrived here at the seller's house. At first glance, the truck was actually in better condition than I thought. The paint seemed to be okay and didn't have any severe fading or rust. Now, I did notice on the side of the truck it had a nice deep fresh scratch all the way down to the bare metal. I can tell this scratch just happened recently because there's no rust forming on it yet. So that's definitely a good sign. Another eyesore was this hood. It almost looks like it's a bullet hole, but I'm not going to assume anything crazy here. The hole was also rusted out and it was far too big to make a proper patch job, so I knew this thing would definitely need to be replaced, and that's a few $100s right off the bat for a hood, painted and everything. Now, the front bumper was also showing some clear coat peeling. Usually the front end of vehicles on older cars take most of the brunt because the wind's always hitting them. They are going to be the first to wear out when it comes to clear coating and fading. The fog lights were also completely shot out looking and they didn't work at all. Now, going back here to the rear tailgate, it was super loose I noticed, and it also didn't close properly. You had to stick your finger in the latch, pull up the handle at the same time to actually close the back tailgate. But other than those few things, the condition of the exterior was not a total disaster. The only other minor thing I found was the driver's side visor was all cracked up, but that seems like a pretty easy and inexpensive fix. Now, the one thing I did notice about the exterior that was really good is that the tires were in awesome shape. Tires are not cheap at all, so that's at least a little bit relieving. Now, moving on to the interior was a whole nother story. The driver's seat was completely blown out, but I already expected that here from the picture. The seller was a pretty hefty built big guy, and with a big guy like that getting in and out of the truck, he literally took some of the seat with him every time he stepped out of this truck. The seat either needed to be completely redone or replaced. The rear seats were also pretty nasty with a nice size ripped on the side seat with what looked to be like some coffee colored stain. No idea what it was, no idea how it got there, but it was a pretty big eyesore. The center console was also completely broken, so the lid was literally just sitting there, not secured by anything, and the smell was also pretty nasty in here. I honestly don't believe this truck has ever in its life been detailed, and it just had caked up gunk and dust everywhere in the cup holders and all around the dash. It was just literally dirty in every single spot you looked, and I'm starting to see why this truck was actually priced this low. The dash didn't have any cracks though or any missing pieces, so I guess that's one thing you can say was okay with the interior of this truck. All in all, it was pretty nasty and it needed a lot of love here in this interior. So with the exterior being in kind of bad condition and the interior being in kind of really bad condition, let's hope this thing is decent when it comes to mechanical issues. I turned the key and to my surprise, it started up nicely, but honestly, I wasn't surprised at all to see the dash light up like a Christmas tree. We had an ABS light on, the brake wear light on, the old check engine light was definitely on. Now, funny enough, the only light that wasn't on was the gear indicator. Down here, it should show the miles and what gear you're in, whether it's in park, neutral drive, or a manual gear. Now, I also noticed after a few seconds of turning it on that the gas gauge was jumping around like crazy. 1 second it would say full, the next second it would say empty, 1 second it would say a quarter tank. It was just jumping all over the place. So I knew something called the sending module in the truck was shot, and we'll get to that a little later. So I checked the window motors to see if they were working good, and you can see here the driver's side window was really slow, and the motor here on the passenger side was so weak weak, it couldn't even lift up the motor after I lowered it. So those definitely need to be replaced. I plugged in my Obd Reader to see what all the lights were showing, and we got back 3 different codes. So the first code was C2065, which means the anti-lock braking system pump relay is bad. And I know from experience the modules on those ABS pumps are pretty pricey. Now, the next thing was a P0405, which means something called the EGR is having some electrical issues. And we'll get into that a little bit later, and I'll explain what all that means. And the last code is a P0463, and this code is just telling me that the fuel gauge is acting up, which I already know, of course, because the fuel gauge is jumping up and down. So now it's time for me to take her on a spin and see if she runs as bad as she looks. And the engine actually ran beautiful to my pleasant surprise. I instantly noticed though a rough shift from first to second gear. And here's a video of what that looked like. Now you can't really feel it obviously because you're not sitting in the truck with me, but if you can see my hand right when the RPMs drop and it shifts gears, my hand kind of shakes a little bit. It wasn't a terrible shift and it didn't feel like the tranny was slipping like it was trying to find a gear, so I didn't really worry about needing a whole new tranny, but it was definitely something that needed to be repaired, of course. Now I also noticed coming to a stop, the brakes squealed here. This truck has probably been sitting for a while and the pads and rotors were all rusted out. It's not a huge deal, but you can definitely see how many little problems are adding up, and I'm finding a whole lot of little problems with this thing. I kind of decided I wanted the truck, even though there's a million different little things wrong with it, there's nothing super major that I couldn't fix. So now the fun part, the negotiation. So now that I know everything wrong with the truck, I'm figuring that it needs anywhere from about $1,500 to $2,000 worth of work to get it in really good condition, and with a price of $3,500 as the price tag and a blue book value of $6,500 in good condition, I know this deal didn't make too much sense at $3,500, so I needed to get this thing for cheaper. So after the test drive, I told the seller I'll be right back. I went to my car, grabbed a pen and a paper, and I wrote down everything that was wrong with the truck and roughly how much I thought it would cost to fix it, if I did my own labor, of course. So after a few minutes, I got out of my car and I walked up to him and I presented him with my offer. So here's every little thing that is wrong with your truck here, boss. The ABS module was bad, the hood can't be repaired, it's going to need to be replaced, the seat is obviously done for, both window motors are failing, the tailgate won't close properly, the visor's busted here in the front, the fog lights are busted, and I went on and on about all the issues I found. I told him I think reasonably with all the existing issues, and not even to mention any of the issues that I might find down the road when actually working on the truck, I'd feel much more comfortable about $2,000. I think it's going to be a fun project. I think I can clean it up pretty nice and it'll still leave me with a pretty fat profit margin. So I set my start price low at $2,000 and he hit me back with $2,750 and told me I can take it off his property. So I said, hey man, let's meet somewhere in the middle at $2,500. I pulled a stack of $100 bills out of my pocket, and I also continued to talk about the many different issues that was wrong with the truck. So he shook my hand at $2,500 as a solid sale price. So now we got possession of the truck. We're gonna go head back to the house and we're gonna start getting this thing looking presentable again. Now, on our way back to the house, I wanna talk to you guys about that negotiation process. Now, when you have someone who wants to sell a car or truck at, let's say, $3,500 like the truck in this example, and you wanna knock him or her down on the price, you really have to have a good reason for the seller to consider that price. And if I just told him straight up $2,000 without barely doing anything or barely talking to them, he probably would have kicked me off his property. But what I did in writing all that stuff down for the seller to actually see with his own eyes and hold that piece of paper, it really made him see that the truck needed a whole lot of work, and that I'm just trying to be reasonable with him. I'm not trying to steal his truck from him at a low price. I'm just trying to get him to see where I'm coming from. If you watch my other car flipping videos, I talk about negotiation a lot, so you definitely got to check those other ones out too if you haven't already. Now, something else I really needed to do before I got back to the house was fill this thing up with some fresh gas. Now, when I was opening the gas tank door to give it some fresh gas, there was actually a wasp nest here on the inside of the door. Now, obviously, we clearly know this thing hasn't been filled up with fresh gas in a while. Now, after a fresh tank of gas, I drove the truck home. There was no hiccups here on the drive home, which was actually a really good sign considering all the little issues I found with it here at the seller's house. So now that we got the truck back at the house in one piece, it's time to start fixing it up. But first, let's start our money invested chart so we can stay a little organized and keep track of all the money we got going into this thing. We have $2,500 for the price of the truck, of course, and we got another $20 that I threw in the gas tank on the way home. Now, I also made this checklist here for every issue that will need to be addressed before I actually list this thing. So let's not waste any time and jump right into it because we got a whole lot of problems here with this truck. And the first issue was that P0405 code, and that that is the EGR valve positioning sensor circuit low. Now, a real quick summary of what the EGR does is it lets hot exhaust air back into the engine so that the engine intake air goes back into the cylinder with less oxygen. The combustion with less oxygen in the engine cylinder ultimately causes less harmful gases released into the environment. So it's one of those environmentally friendly things. Now we got that explanation out of the way, I pulled out the EGR to see if the little valve was stuck. Now EGRs have a valve that opens and closes obviously to let the air into the engine, and I noticed that the valve here was super stuck, so I figured that was definitely the issue. I pulled the old one out and gave it a good cleaning. I got the valve moving again, but that still didn't fix the issue. So I got a new EGR for about $40, popped in the new one, and to my unpleasant surprise, the light was still on after I reset the code. So I looked at the live data here on the EGR, and I saw that the computer was not commanding the EGR to even open. Cars obviously have a computer to regulate everything, and the computer wasn't doing its job. So what I tried next is hooked up my electric circuit tester to see if I can manually shoot a current into the EGR to the computer to see what the scanner says and see if the computer's picking up any voltage. And if you don't have one of these, I obviously will recommend here a circuit tester for you guys that I'll put in the description. If you want to start working on cars, if you're already working on cars, learning how to use one of these things is definitely going to be a lifesaver. So upon shooting a few volts into the EGR with my circuit tester, I checked the scanner at the same time, and it still said no juice was going into the EGR. So the only thing left to conclude was that the PCM, also known as the car's computer, was completely shot out. So I called up this company called Flagship One, and the cool thing about this company is that they actually take your VIN and they program a computer for you at their facility, and then they send it out to you ready to go. And once I receive my PCM here in the mail, all you do is plug it in and boom, you're done. And that fixed our EGR issues, and everything worked perfectly after. And that's not an easy start to check off the first thing on our to-do list, but nonetheless it is done. And that's also why you should always lowball the seller, because you're never going to know what kind of BS you're going to run into when you're fixing up your vehicles. So next, let's shut off that check engine light and work on this P0463 code. And that is the fuel level sensor, of course. So if you look at how the car actually reads how much fuel you'll have to look at a fuel pump. So the fuel pump back here that goes into the fuel tank has wires that run all the way up to the front of the vehicle to the computer, and it tells your gauge to show you how much gas you have left in your tank. So for this job, we're going to need to get the truck lifted off the ground so we can pull that fuel tank out and take a look at what's going on. So I actually got my uncle to help me with this fuel tank, since they can be pretty heavy, especially with a couple of gallons of gas in there. Definitely not light. We popped off the straps that hold the fuel tank in place, and it was just sitting on a bucket and a jack after we got the straps popped off, and that made it easy for us to disconnect all the fuel lines and wiring. And finally, we were able to slide the fuel tank out from under the truck. So we pulled out the old fuel pump, and now with the old fuel pump out, I'll show you guys how this works. So this float here obviously floats on the top of your gas. Now that float thing here makes these two little tabs touch these copper connectors on the sending module. This is how it tells the computer how much gas is left in your tank. You can see on this old fuel pump the tabs didn't touch the connectors properly, and that's why the fuel gauge is dancing around like that. You can see here on the new fuel pump the tabs are nice and tight against the metal connectors like they're supposed to be. So we fit the new fuel pump in the tank and tightened everything back up, and now we officially fixed the fuel gauge. So we can shut off that engine light and be done with all the engine problems. So now there's no more check engine light, we can go back to our money invested chart and we can add everything we've done so far. We got $40 for the new EGR, $150 for the new program PCM for the truck. I also threw my uncle $50 for helping me out with the fuel pump, and we can add another $53 for the cost of the new fuel pump. And that's going to bring us to a grand total of $2,813 so far, and we got a decent running truck with no engine code, so not too bad at all. So now let's attack that hard shift in the transmission. Now I know that hard shifts usually come from low or old transmission fluid, but when I was inspecting the truck, I did notice that there was a new service tag on the rear differential and the training fluid looked brand new. So I guess this guy actually serviced it right before he decided to post for sale, but still had that rough shift. So I did a little research on the issue and found a bunch of information online with a lot of people having the same issue with this transmission. The part here is what everyone's saying to get, and that's something called a shift accumulator. Apparently the factory ones fail pretty easily, and this is going to be our ticket to solve that rush shift. So first things first, we got to drain all this training fluid out in a container because we're going to reuse it since it's pretty much brand new. So just like changing your oil, you pop the plug and you let all the fluid drain out. So once I got most of the training fluid out, it was time to drop the training pan and swap out that accumulator. It was fairly easy, just 3 bolts, and it came right out. And when we popped in the new one, I put the pan back on, filled it up with some transmission fluid, and I added a little fresh fluid because we lost some in the process since it's a real messy job. And after, we got a beautiful shift from first to second, and the tranny ran smooth as butter. It only came out to $45 for the part, and I threw my uncle another $50 for helping out with this messy ass job. So let's tack that on to the money invested chart, and we'll go back and cross that off the to-do list and keep on moving. So the next thing I wanted to fix was that faulty shift indicator gauge not lighting up on the instrument cluster. So I popped out the dash, and it was really easy here on this truck. These older American cars, only 4 screws holding in the instrument cluster, so it was a breeze. Now that I got it out on the kitchen table, I popped all the tabs on the plastic that hold everything together, and what I'm looking for here is any loose solder points that may have gotten disconnected. So I dig around for a little in the instrument cluster until I found this. This little metal connector here was completely split from the circuit board. Now, I'm no soldering professional, so don't make fun of me here for all you circuit board geeks, but I did a good enough job to make sure that the connector was back on board. I popped it all back together, threw it back in the dash, and I crossed my fingers, and boom, we got it fixed. And if you've been paying attention, you remember the truck was supposed to have 130,000 miles from the ad, and not 141,000 like it actually had. I really wasn't that mad because the guy could have honestly made a mistake, and he wasn't super far off. It wasn't even really worth calling him and complaining, so I just rode with the punch here. So let's cross off the instrument cluster off the to-do list and keep moving on. So now we got the check engine light off and we got the instrument cluster fixed. It's time to get that ABS light taken care of. Now, for you guys who don't know what ABS stands for anti-lock braking system. It keeps your brakes from locking up when you have to press on the brake pedal hard. So I went to check the fuse box and the ABS fuse was disconnected. I was hoping plugging this thing in would fix it, but upon plugging in the fuse, I figured out the issue here. You can see even with the truck off, the ABS pump just constantly runs, so it definitely needs an ABS control module. Now I got one here for about $265 from carparts.com, and like I said before, these modules are pretty pricey. Now these ABS modules are not very hard to change on these trucks. On this one, all you need to do is unscrew 4 screws on this top part here, which is the control module, and it pops off the pump. All you do is slap the new one on and you're good. Well, another setback happened. These screws at the top were completely stripped out, so the control module was not coming off. So what I had to do now was a serious pain. I had to unscrew all these brake lines out of the ABS assembly, and it was a super tight squeeze. I had to use these crowfoot brake line attachments, loosen everything up slowly one by one. Brake fluid was dripping everywhere, and brake fluid is no joke. Definitely one of the most corrosive fluids in a vehicle. This stuff will eat up your skin real quick. But I got all the brake lines off finally, and I unscrewed the assembly and got it all out. And as you can see here, all the screws here are pretty much stripped out, so I actually had to drill them out to be able to pop off the old control module. Grabbed some new screws from the shed and was able to secure the new module down to the pump, and I threw it back in. And now the ABS fuse is plugged back in, and we do not have that constant running anymore. So we can go ahead and cross off the ABS module off the list and move on to the next thing, which was those squealing brakes. So remember when I showed you guys that coming to a complete stop made the brakes squeak real bad? Now that can be from a few things like old or worn down brake pads, or it can be from slightly warped rotors. The rotors seem super old and rusted from sitting, and the brake pads were cheap enough to replace. So I just bought a set here from carparts.com, and you can see here a lot of the pads had uneven brake wear, which was probably the cause of the squeak. Also, one caliper was completely seized. No matter what I did to the brake piston, it would not go back, and it even bent my caliper tool. So I ran over to the parts store real quick with the old caliper as the core and walked out with a brand new one. And after I got it installed, it looks pretty nice here with the new rotor, the new pad, and this new brake caliper. And after it was all back together, we have one last thing brake related to do, and that was to bleed the brakes. So since we had to pop off the whole ABS assembly off the truck, it now calls for a complete brake bleed. Anytime you remove a brake line, it lets air into the brake lines and your brakes will be squishy and they won't work properly. So I went ahead and performed the brake bleed on the truck and flushed out all the brake lines. Now this was actually pretty well past due on this truck. You can see here this old fluid, how nasty it looked. So I probably would have done it regardless no matter what anyways, even if we didn't replace the ABS control module. Now I do have an entire video on how to properly bleed the brakes on a vehicle all by yourself, so you guys can check that out if you're interested in doing a brake bleed. So now the brake bleed is completely done. We can cross that off the list and everything with the brakes is done. So let's hop back to our money invested chart real quick, and we're going to add $265 for the ABS control module, another $200 for the brake pad and rotors kit, another $70 for the brake caliper, and last but not least, $10 for the brake fluid we used to flush the brake lines. So now all the mechanical issues are fixed on this truck. We got no more dash lights, but this thing is still pretty ugly, so let's get this thing looking presentable again. So what I like to do is start on the interior. Now we're going to start with this disaster of a driver's seat. This seat needed to be completely redone or replaced. So I hopped to the junkyard website and saw a seat from them was over $300. So I just took it to my favorite upholstery shop and had them redo it for me. It cost me a hefty $200, but honestly, the seat looked awesome when they were done. And it was the same color, so I didn't have to worry about finding the same color at a junkyard. So let's cross the driver's seat off the list and keep moving on. Now, I wanted to work on the window motors, so in replacing the window motors, the first thing you got to do is get the door panel off. Usually door panels are just held on by a few hidden screws, and then you're able to lift them off without an issue. Now, once the panel is off, I found all the screws that were holding up what's something called the window regulator. But before I do that, I had to tape up the window so the window wouldn't just fall out. So I pulled out the window regulator, and I pulled out the old weak motor off the regulator, and then I got a new motor from carparts.com that I slapped on, and then you can just do everything in reverse, and now we got a nice strong rotor that can lift up the window. I obviously repeated the process on both sides, and boom, the window motors were fixed. So now we can cross that off the list, and we can keep moving on to the next thing. So next, me and my helper gave this thing a super thorough detail since this truck was so nasty. This step took us a little bit considering how dirty literally every square inch of the truck was. Now, I've never used this new lithium product before, but for this detail, I needed something really strong, and I used this product called Hyper Cleanse. This stuff is awesome. It's even strong enough to clean old grease stains off the carpet. Don't really even need to scrub it, just spray it on and it wipes off almost like magic. This stuff's great. We finished off the detail using a product also by Lithium called Inner Space, which leaves the panels with a really nice semi-gloss, kind of like they just came out of the factory. And Lithium actually agreed to cut all my viewers an awesome deal on all their products. That's 20% off everything store-wide with promo code BuddiesDIY20. And I'll leave all that information in the description for you guys. Legit, best quality detailing products money can buy, bar none. So now that the interior is looking nice and clean, it's time to cross that off the list and move on to getting these seats dyed. Now the back seat was the worst when it came to discoloration. Now I do get my seat dye from seatdoctors.com, and what they actually do is they take your VIN and they give you the exact factory color of your interior so you can really make your leather look brand new again with a perfect matching color. And as you can see here, after the seat dye treatment, my back seat looked practically brand new. Also the passenger seat as well, since it did have some white stains and wear and tear. And once I was finished dyeing the seats, I slapped the seats back into the interior of the truck, and now it is looking awesome. So let's cross off the seat dye and move on to fixing the center console. So I guess it's a pretty common issue with these trucks having these hinges on the center console break off, because you can find replacement lids on these things for pretty much anywhere. Carparts.com had one for about $73. It was pretty straightforward popping in the new one, and it only took me about 2 minutes to figure it out. So we can junk this old cracked center console and cross off repairing the center console off the list, and now we're going to move on to the finishing touches. So you can see here the steering wheel is super worn down looking, and some leather dye will not save this wheel. So what I did is get a nice quality branded steering wheel cover and covered it up. And for the floor mats, I decided to scrap the old factory mats since they were super worn down looking, and got some cut to fit size from WeatherTech floor mats. These mats are super awesome, and you can literally cut them to any given size you want to give you the best fit possible. They're reasonably cheap at only $70 from carparts.com, and then also came with the back floor mat as well. These two little details really made the interior pop and look awesome again. This interior really came a long way, and it's looking super clean, and I'm really stoked about it. So real quick, let's jump back to the money invested chart and add some things. We got $200 for the driver's seat reupholstery. We got $70 for the two window motors. We got $75 for the center console lid. And last but not least, we got $90 for the interior accessories. So now this truck is free of all mechanical issues. The interior is looking completely redone and beautiful, if I don't say so myself. So now it's time to work on this exterior and get it looking awesome again. So the first thing I'm going to start with is this busted visor. I knew if I took this thing off, it would leave a nice trail of gunk, and it would take forever to get all the other visors off and scrub all that old adhesive. So for time's sake, I decided to just replace it. I took my heat gun and I slowly but surely got all the plastic off. I decided to just replace the driver's side and let the new owner have the other side as a backup, since the passenger side was in pretty good shape. But let's go ahead and cross the visor off the list and keep on moving on. So now I wanted to fix this loose tailgate that didn't close right. So I knew I needed new tailgate latches, and for $50 I was able to get two brand new latches here at carparts.com. Taking off the old latches was really easy. There's just two screws holding them on, and then there's a little metal rod that sticks through the back of the latch and is secured by a small plastic piece. I cut away the plastic piece on the old lash and was able to yank it off. And then I took my new lash, I pushed the little rod through, snapped the plastic secure pin down, and I threw the two bolts back in. I repeated the process here on both sides, and you can see here these new latches work perfectly. Everything closes, it's super secured, no more wiggling, so we can go ahead and we can cross that off our to-do list as well. So now that we got that done, I wanted to seal the paint here on that scratch on the side of the truck. I can tell the scratch was fresh because when you scratch your paint this deep, rust will actually start to form because metal is just sitting there naked, unprotected. So I went to my local auto body supplier and I grabbed some touch-up paint and went along the whole scratch. It doesn't look perfect by any means, but at least rust won't start forming anytime soon for the new owner of the truck. It's a 23-year-old truck that will probably be used as a work truck, so I didn't bother paying a professional $100 to fix this scratch because this would have been a pretty costly scratch to fix. So now the scratch is taken care of, it's time to move on to replacing these old raggedy looking fog lights. So these fog lights were actually way cheaper than I thought to replace. For only $30 at carparts.com, I was able to buy a set with the bulbs, everything installed, ready to go. Now you're probably noticing I'm getting a lot of parts here from carparts.com. And just for a quick explanation, I bought auto parts all over the web like Rock Auto, Parts Geek, and obviously you guys know I love eBay. But with carparts.com, I've never lost a package, and they literally have every single thing you can think of for all makes and models. They're actually starting to become my favorite all-time place to get parts online, and the shipping is quicker than all the other places that I've noticed. So that's obviously a huge plus when you're trying to get a project car done. I know they do stock all their own inventory so they can pass on those savings style outsourcing. And no, they are not paying me for this video, so I just want to be clear about that. Now, time to get back to the fog lights. It was pretty straightforward pulling these old lights out with only one wire and cable and 2 little bolts holding them in. I plugged in the new one and secured it down with the same 2 bolts. It also had a little twist adjuster that I could twist, and I can adjust the angle of the fog lights to make sure they were nice and level. And a huge difference from the front end. For only $30, these old fog lights looked horrible and these new ones look beautiful. So let's cross off the fog lights off the list and we'll keep on working. So next thing I want to take care of was this bumper. The clear coat was peeling off bad and I knew this thing needed to be repainted. So I opted just paint it myself, and my all-time favorite paint is that trim and bumper paint by Rust-Oleum. This stuff is super durable. I've used it on my rim painting video, and I've used it on other videos as well. I actually made a video on how to paint your car here with this stuff, usually doing it at a panel at a time. Painting takes a lot of steps, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave a link here for that video for you guys if you are interested. It gave the bumper a really nice matte look, and it came out perfect. So now back to the to-do list. Let's cross the bumper off, and let's get this thing cleaned up. So we get to finally take this thing here to the car wash and get it all nice and shiny. And with the amount of change I found under the seats and in the cup holders, this car wash was 100% paid for by the seller, so big shout out to dude that was too lazy to clean his change out. So we can cross the car wash off the list and move on to the finishing touches. And these trim cubes by Lithium make restoring trim super quick and easy. All you need to do is make sure the trim is nice and clean, and then you just wipe it down here with these trim cubes. It's literally that easy. These trim cubes leave a super durable finish that is guaranteed for the life of the vehicle, and I made a whole video about these awesome little cubes here. And also guys, don't forget 20% off all Lithium products with the promo code BuddiesDIY. So the trim is all restored, looking brand new again. We can go back to our to-do list and cross it off. So now it's time for everyone's favorite part, and that is to restore these old looking faded headlights. And lucky for you guys, I have a video on the exact method I'd use on every single car I buy or flip. This is the best and easiest method. It's guaranteed to make your headlights look brand new again, no matter how bad they look now. And since we want these headlights to stay looking nice, it's always good to add some ceramic coating to them to make sure they're protected from the sun. So I treated them with the Ceram Slam here by Lithium, and this stuff lasts not weeks but months. So we'll cross the headlights off the list, and last but not least, it was time to get this hood replaced. Now I can't list this thing with a bullet hole here in the hood, so I ordered a new hood here from carparts.com, and it came out here to about $200, which isn't bad at all for an entire hood. So I got some paint here from my local auto body supplier, hooked up my paint gun, strapped the hood to the ceiling, and blasted it down with a nice fresh coat of paint and clear coat. And since it already came pre-primed delivered, I didn't have to do any prep work besides just a quick wipe down with some alcohol. Now you guys do know I have my huge paint booth that I can put up in my backyard. I used it in episode 2 of How to Flip Cars where I painted that BMW, but for this hood I honestly just did it in my garage because it wasn't too big of a deal and I didn't have to mask anything off. And after letting the paint and clear coat dry up properly, it was a close enough match that I was really happy with the result. Much better than that bullet hole hood, of course. So we can cross off the last thing off the to-do list and get rid of this list altogether. So now it's finally time to add the final things to the money invested chart. We have $45 for the new visor set, $50 for the tailgate latches, $11 for the touch-up paint, $30 for the fog lights, and about $5 worth of spray paint for spraying the bumper down, $200 for the hood, and about $30 of spray paint for painting the hood. So let's go ahead and add another $75 just for miscellaneous stuff like gas, running around, detailing products, spare bolts, and all that good stuff. And now that the hood is back on the truck, this thing is looking awesome if I do say so myself. The exterior came out super clean, the interior came such a long way from the tragedy it looked like before, and the truck is free of all mechanical issues, and it's finally time to take some pictures and get this thing sold. But first, let's add everything up here on this money invested chart, and all the things that you see here added up to a grand total of $4,259 invested in this truck. So now let's get rid of this thing and see what kind of profit we're looking at. Now before I snap some pictures, I wanted to give it a quick wipe down with this waterless wash by Lithium that makes the paint really shine extra bright here for the pictures. And then I hit some tires with this tire shine here by Lithium as well, and this tire shine lasts a few weeks, not a few days, and I know I'll have this thing sold before then since trucks are such a hot commodity right now. So I took some pictures, and a quick note is always take your pictures vertically, because on for sale apps, which I'm assuming most everybody uses now on their phone, the pictures are a lot larger when taken vertically. So here's an example what a vertical picture looks like to a horizontal picture. So be sure to hold your phone upright when you're snapping these pics. I posted a nice detailed description of all the new things I replaced on this truck, and I really hammered home the fact this thing is now super clean and it has absolutely zero mechanical issues. When you write a description, you always want to make sure you include all the good things about the truck and add as much detail as you can. I decided to price this thing right at the Kelley Blue Book price since it's a clean 4x4 with a nice size 5.3 liter engine, and I know it'll sell very close to that. And within 3 days of listing it, I had a serious buyer already. So me and this guy scheduled a time that worked for the both of us, and I could tell this dude was not messing around by the way he was talking. He didn't shoot me some lowball offer. All he wanted to do was come see the truck right away. The gentleman came, and within 20 minutes, he pulled $6,000 out of his pocket, and he was ready to buy it right then and there. And I told him if he could find another $300, he can pull it off the driveway and be done with it. He searched his car, he found another $300, so we shook hands and we made a deal. And with a sale price of $6,300 minus the total amount we have invested in this truck, which is $4,259, that leaves us with a net profit of $2,041. Not bad at all. So now let's do a little bit of math together and figure out roughly how much money we made per hour. It took about 3 hours to mess with the EGR and diagnosing it with a bad PCM, 2 hours to knock out that fuel pump since I had help from my uncle, only about an hour and a half for the shift accumulator since it was only a few bolts. I did fight with the ABS module for a while, so a solid 4 hours on that at least. 2 hours for the full brake job, and we'll add another hour on top of that brake job since I had to run to get the caliper real quick from the parts store. About an hour to bleed the brakes, 2 hours for the window motors since it was about an hour each side. The console lid only took a few minutes, so let's just put down 15 minutes, and 30 minutes to cut the mats and slap on the steering wheel cover. The tailgate latches took maybe about 45 minutes. Touch up paint only took about 15 minutes. An hour for the fog lights. Now painting the bumper did take a little bit since I had a mask, so maybe about 2 hours for that. Painting the hood only took about an hour since I didn't have to mask anything off. Now dyeing the seats and detailing probably took a good 6 hours since it was quite the process, removing all the seats, making sure everything was super spotless. And last but not least, let's just say another 6 hours of miscellaneous things like driving around, shopping parts, inspecting the car, buying the car, and all that good stuff. So that's going to give us a total of 34 hours of labor invested in this truck, and with a net profit of $2,041, we can divide that by 34 hours to give us a grand total of roughly $60 an hour. Not too bad for a blue collar dude like myself with a couple of wrenches. And the best part about it, I got no boss breathing down my neck telling me when to work or how to work or any of that. Now, if you've seen my other flip videos, you'll know that about $60 an hour is not usually where I want to be. Well, you can't get a home run every single flip, and I still had a lot of fun, and this truck was still pretty profitable. So I'd say it's a win. Now, even though I only spent about 34 hours fixing this truck, I'm about 40 hours into editing this video, which is crazy since it takes longer to make these videos than it actually does to fix the vehicle. So please show your boy some love, hit the like button so YouTube knows that you guys enjoyed these flip videos, and obviously subscribe if you haven't, because this series is not going anywhere. There's many more flip videos to come in the future in 2022, and I'm going to share all those with you guys. And here's a little sneak peek of the next car flip video, and you guys definitely don't want to miss it. It's going to be a good one. I really try to improve on every video for you guys and make these more and more entertaining. I do all my own editing, filming, and repairs. So if you do want to support the channel so I can keep investing in these super detailed videos, you can support me by either going to my Patreon, where you're going to have a direct link that you can ask me any car questions, business questions, pretty much anything you want. My patrons always get a quick reply from me. And if you don't want to be a patron, you can go over to Lithium Auto Care, use my promo code for some super good quality detailing stuff. It'll also make a great gift coming up for the holidays. And I'm not kidding when I say their stuff is the best stuff I've ever used. I couldn't could have partnered up with literally any detailing company, but honestly, I chose them for a reason. So go check out lithiumautocare.com and you can use my code for 20% off anything store-wide. And if you don't want to be a patron and you don't want any detailing products, you can always leave me a tip by hitting this little super like button right here. I know there's a couple YouTubers out there that also flip cars and they sell these courses for a bunch of money. Do not buy that. The stuff is garbage. I give you everything here for free. My content is free and will stay free, so definitely consider supporting the channel. Also, I recently made an Instagram, so follow me on Instagram because we're going to be doing some tool giveaways for some free tools for you guys, so don't miss out on that. So like I said, stay tuned because this next flip video is going to be an absolute banger. Let me know in the comments what cars you guys want me to flip coming 2022. Stay safe, guys, and I'll see you on the next video.